5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to this week's edition of the EUVC Lowdown, the show that wraps up the week in European venture with some of the key people making the headlines. Today we're going to cover Depot Ventures Engaged Investment Conference. We're also going to dive into a debate about what is to come in the European VC deal-making scene, as we will ask the question, will the money flow or will it not? We'll also dive into Elon Musk's bid to buy out Twitter, as Kathy White will take us through her thinking around that and whether it'll be the end of Twitter or what is going to happen there. And then finally, we'll dive into Dan Bauer's hot new framework for founder pitch deck and why it matters to VC, and also put that into the context of a VC fund narrative. But Peter, let's jump into the Engaged Investment Conference as the very first topic. I am going, of course, and so is David and the whole EUVC gang. And we love what you're putting on there because you've got the best motivation and vision that I think anyone could have for a conference. So take us through it, Peter.
Yeah, first of all, I'm very pleased that you are coming and you are helping us. That's great. The concept of the conference is developing in the last 4 years. We launched it we did it first time 4 years ago. We run an angel funds, angel network around Czechia and the Czech Republic. And the concept of angel investing in these countries is not so common. So we wanted to just to make it a little bit more public, bring together people that really already invest and people that would think about investing. And we didn't want to call it anything connected to angels because people didn't know what angels really are. So we call it engage investment, and it proved to be a very perfect concept because right now what we slowly are doing, we are doing it much broader than just pure angels, because we are bringing together all investors that claim to have a hands-on approach, just to explain each other what's the hands-on approach, be it angels, be it early stage VC, be it even LPs. We moved obviously during COVID. We were online. Last year was the first, shortly after COVID was the first offline, and we started having people, investors from other countries. And this year we focus very much internationally. Still our region from Central Eastern Europe, what we call it, and it's basically from Baltics, from Estonia down to Bulgaria, Greece, including Germany, including all these countries, because what we see, there is plenty of smallish countries, and if each of them play on their own background, it doesn't make much sense. So we see all this region as basically one region with local specialties, and it's investors only. So we see that there are many events for investors, startups, but this is purely intended to bring together investors, experienced investors, beginners, and we want to do it every year. And we want to really go around and bring more new investors in the early stage game.
And the reason why, I think this is such an important mission is that you come with a strong angel background yourself. You've run the BAN, the Business Angel Network of Prague or Czech Republic, and then what you've kind of transitioned into is being a very, very strong voice for this pan-European investment approach and bringing venture investors and meaning both the VCs and the angels together and strengthening that relationship. And I'm super curious to hear Dan and Kathy's take on this as well, meaning how can we increase the collaboration between the two parties? Because it's of course something that we believe in very strongly, and it's also something that I think that both parties can learn a lot from. Dan, would you care to comment on this?
I love the CEE region. You're in Czech Republic, Peter.
Yeah.
I love the region. I'm constantly meeting incredibly smart people, and I don't want to politically or diplomatically punch myself in the face, but I kind of put everywhere, I guess, east of Berlin in a bracket in my head where there's just ridiculously smart people doing ridiculously smart things, who don't get enough access. And London being kind of the center of the venture world in Europe, rightly or wrongly, like or love or loathe. But I love it. The challenge that I have is time. So we've recently, across the board, and there's only 6 of us in the team, cut the going to all the events and trying to be out there and be all things to all people, because we're just not doing enough business. We're not focusing on us enough. So I'm in a slight quandary as to how much time to spend and where and doing what. But I'm a massive fan. I'd love to come. I'm a massive fan of what you're doing, and I'm a massive fan of the region in the general sense.
Kathy, I'm curious because I met you the first time down in Bucharest for How to Web, and you are yourself in Barcelona. Why was it relevant for you to come to How to Web, and how do you think about the region, and how do you think about, because you do a lot of comms work with the VCs, I'm curious to hear, how do you work with angels, if at all?
So I'm actually an angel. So there's that. So with the event in Bucharest, honestly, I was invited. When someone invites you to go to a conference in a country that you've never been to before, I was really excited to go and check it all out. And the one thing that really stood out to me with the entrepreneurs that I met at How to Web conference was the energy and the excitement from each of them in terms of what they were doing. Now, the environment seems much younger, like having been in London for 10 years before then moving to Barcelona. But I think there's a lot of potential. I used to work at Seed Camp, and obviously they were one of the first investors in UiPath. So in Romania, that's the big one that's winning at the moment. And it was great just to see how much that's grown and how much UiPath is now starting to play a part in the other businesses that are developing there. So starting to see the early beginnings of people reinvesting that are coming out of UiPath and doing really well. But yeah, there was just, for me, that trip was very much just about learning. So it's just getting to understand what's going on in that ecosystem and meet a few more of the right people. What I found really fascinating at that conference was the pitch competition. Yeah. So there was one thing that happened. Mike Butcher was hosting this pitch competition, for context, and all of the finalists were men, the classic. And it was amazing. He just went onto the stage and he said to the crowd, we've got a gap here. Female founders, get up on stage and pitch your startup. And so many women stood up. And that was really cool. There was definitely a lot of female entrepreneurs in that audience as well, which was just really great to see. Yeah.
I cannot count the number of times we on this show have spoken about the gender gap and how to fix it and so on. Just yesterday, I introed Dan to a lady who runs a podcast only for female VCs. And I challenged her to bring on Dan on that show, because I said, I really think that Dan has something to say on this topic, but I don't think we should dive into it too much now, because we've spent so many times on the show. But we absolutely agree, Kathy. We have a gender gap that we need to fix. Now I'll go to the next subject, which is the question about, will the money flow in European VC? What are we looking at? So this all started for me, or at least it came to my top of mind this week, because of course we had John Sokada come out with his big piece where he said that his dry powder models showed that the VC industry will only have a modest slowdown in this year in comparison to last year, and we will continue to see record levels of investment in 2023 and 2024. And then you had Michael Jackson commenting on it, saying that, well, remember, LP money has to be called, and LPs can push back hard on that. So just because there's dry powder doesn't mean that it'll get deployed. I kind of thought to myself when I read that, I'm not really sure that I have heard or seen much of that behavior. But I'm curious to hear Dan and Peter's take. Also, if you can even talk about your own LP base, if you've had any pushback on you continuing to deploy in the current market. Peter, I'll let you start on this.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid I'm not the right one to comment on that, because so far our first two funds were kind of rolling funds. Money were called right after commitment, so we started investing right when we have the first money. Didn't wait for closing. The third fund, the third structure will be a little bit different. Will be the classical one, or much more classical. And I think from now on, we don't have to fear that, because if somebody commits right now, probably knows what he's doing. And I always say the situation for us might be a little bit better, because the guys that I call tourist investors disappeared, and the tourist investors are kind of hardening, make our life much more difficult in difficult times. So investors that invest right now are the investors that know what they are doing. And if I may, my common sense tells me that there is quite a lot of money printed in the last years, and they are still around, and they are concentrated in big LPs. How to get the money from the market is high interest rate, high inflation, so people have to, even the wealthy people have to invest. And VC is the best performing asset class, so they should be still investing. But that's my feeling. I'm not sitting in London, so I would be curious what Dan thinks about it.
It's I think you're right on so many points. I think the last point first around VC being the best performing asset class, it is, but it's obviously the highest risk. So I think that's all LPs see, and that's regardless of bull or bear moments in time. I think there are those that get it and that want to come in and understand that it's part of a diversified portfolio, but there are those that just look at risk and they look at the spread across the performance. Even though it's the highest performing asset class, the spread is quite deep. Whereas obviously if you're in public, or if you're in other safer asset classes, the spread is much more shallow. But to come back to the point of are LPs kicking back, or are LPs still effectively committing to their commit, and when there's a drawdown notice out, are they kicking back, or are they not performing? I have not seen it. I've not heard of it. I think that would be super bad form, because any LP that is in VC, and Peter again very clearly draws the line between the tourists and the real VCs, or the real investors. I've not seen it. It's still early days. The world has really, in news terms, only recently started melting. Obviously, the Nasdaq took a poop in January, which then turned the growth stocks into a tumble and a 40% haircut. But I think we're about 25% down at the moment across the board. But I've not seen or experienced it. Now, keep in mind, this is only my second fund. My first fund was primarily mine and my partner's money with some friends, family, fools. This is our first institutional fund. So I don't have the breadth of experience. If I was on Fund 7, maybe I'd be able to give you some more horror stories about LPs not committing to their commitment. But I've not seen or heard of it, and I think I would have done it. It's one of those things that you would hear through back channels. Oh, such and such an LP hasn't an action to draw down, or has pulled a deal, or has kicked back in some way. So I think those that get it, which is primarily all of the people in early stage, understand the risk, and all the LPs, most of them have been through a couple of downturns. Yeah. So I think they will still deploy. There is a lot of cash for VCs still to deploy. And even if there are some outliers that do not perform or do not commit, I don't think it will touch the sides.
Now, I was curious. Kathy, feel free to jump in if you have anything. Otherwise, I'll go to the big subject of Twitter.
No, I've got very little to add, unfortunately. So we work with a few different VCs, and a few are in good positions at the moment in that they're just closing. But they're first-time funds. It's a little bit more exciting, or partners have come from some interesting places. For one VC we work with, they're in the position of raising right now, and the only thing I'm getting told is it's slower than anticipated, and bad timing, and all of this stuff. Exactly.
They won't know any different. It's always painful. We started raising in January 20, and then COVID hit, and went, oh my goodness, who's going to move this now? And then started raising millions over Zoom. Most of our LPs I didn't even meet until last summer, which to me was nuts. How could you give somebody £1 million over a Zoom call? But then that's just the way business is done. So give them some comfort that it's always a nightmare, and everything's going to be okay.
Oh yeah, I keep saying that, and then we'll keep doing the fingers crossed as well.
Just activity. Just work out. The main thing that the LPs I found care about is differentiation. Yeah. They don't care about anything else, and that's a double-edged sword, because most people differentiate in the feeling space, when really LPs just want returns and safety and comfort. So there's a horrible balance between saving all the brown babies and making cash. So that's always a funny conundrum I found. But if they're differentiated, then it's just activity. That's all I found, is just hammer the phones, send the letters, get off email.
Yeah. I heard the greatest story from an LP a couple of weeks back, where we asked him what. So we talked about his fund investment strategy, and then he said, well, I only do biotech and blah blah blah. And then we said, but you've done that fund. And then I won't mention the fund's name here, but what he then said was, well, have you met? And then he mentioned the managing partner's name. When you wake up every morning for a week with a call, unanswered call from the same guy, then sometimes you just wire the money. So exactly, activity. You just have to keep on calling as a fundraising manager. Kathy, now let's jump to you said before, I think everything will be good. Let's touch on Twitter then. Will everything be good? What is your perspective?
Elon, must he buy Twitter? So I actually am still forming my perspective on this. I keep following it. It's interesting to watch. So for context, in the last couple of days, he's flip-flopped again. So going through the process of going through the lawsuit with Twitter, Elon's now come back and said, yes, he will buy it. Still looking at a $44 billion price tag. And it's interesting reading various different publications and their take on this. So a few are going to the scary end. He's going to bring back full, and it sounds terrible to describe this as scary end, I do apologize, but he's looking really at the freedom of speech side of things. He's going to bring back accounts that have been cancelled, and this is all stuff that's being talked about while we're getting closer to the US midterms. So there's lots of kind of scary things that could happen on that side. But there's also rumours that he could build a WeChat style app, which would incredibly change the face of Twitter. And he's also said something completely bonkers, admirable, but bonkers, of adding 750 million users in a couple of years. For context, Twitter currently has 217. So we'll get it closer to 1 billion. There's just a lot of question marks for me. So what is the real purpose behind Musk wanting to buy Twitter? Given that he will have to use a lot of Tesla stock in order to actually do the buyout and all of the different deals that are in motion to make it happen. There's a lot of talk about the relationship that he has with current Twitter CEO. So if he does buy it out, we can imagine that Parag Agrawal will be available for a job very swiftly. And yeah, it's I've been on Twitter since 2010. I think I joined when I was still at university as a tool for me in comms, just keeping on top of everything that's going on in this world. It's incredibly valuable. It's such a wonderful place for journalists. I know there's lots of issues there, but it is a great place for journalists to be very quickly sharing their takes. And I just looking at all of this and wondering what an unpleasant social media app this could end up being if it becomes like WeChat. So it's just open to everyone really to get your thoughts. What do you think is going to happen next with Twitter? And actually, are you even using it still compared to things like LinkedIn?
Blimey, where do you start? I am semi-worried that somebody who is clearly on the spectrum is going to own the town square. So I am not to be insensitive, well, I am being insensitive. I am concerned that somebody with that much power, weight, and that much brand collateral owning the town square, when you have Bezos in the Post, you have Murdoch in his empire. Yeah. So there was something about the weights and measures in public companies, maybe keeping it a little bit more moderated. But I'm not convinced it's going to be much more than what it does at the moment. I'm not convinced he can get it to 1 billion users. I'm not convinced by much of this. What I am intrigued by is the concept of a super app, because I can understand how that works in an authoritarian regime like in China, where there are so many overt controls, but where you have so much regulation and you have so many other weights and measures, controls, compliance, regulation, I can't see how a super app in the States or across Europe would work. I know that WhatsApp have tried many different variations, and obviously WhatsApp is not Twitter, but it is a broadcasting tool and a messaging app, and they've tried to install payment portals and community overlays and business applications to various degrees of success. But to have, what is it? He's called X, I think, isn't he? So to drive this as a super app that is going to be, it has to be based around payments. Every app is a fintech app in my head. Every app has to kind of have that lens. How you operate that, I just can't see it getting through all the friction points that it would need to become a true super app that works in the States or across Europe. So that's what's on my mind is unpacking that. But we'll see. We might not get there. This might just be a ruse to quash the legal battle, which looks like they want to continue with.
Yeah.
And even seeing things like the ridiculous commentary between the existing CEO and Musk, when he knew, obviously in the early messages pre-purchase, he knew how many fake users Twitter had. So understanding that there is a game being played here, but not fully understanding what the game is, I think it'd be really interesting to watch how it plays out.
Yeah, it does feel like one of those situations. Here's the shiny new thing over here. Look away from the other thing that's going on in the background. But like you say, we don't know what that is.
He's so good at it. He does that with flamethrowers, isn't he? He does that with man-shaped robots. I mean, so it's almost like he's constantly kind of like using these shields for bad news days, or just to keep the brand going, or just to keep people poked in the eye with something a bit ridiculous. We're going to bore tunnels under LA. We're going to sell flamethrowers. We're going to sell man-shaped robots. Like, what the freaky deek?
I thought what Kathy said there was spot on, because I'm sure what he's doing with Twitter is he's taking focus away from the fact that he's building Ultron. And that's what it is, So, Kathy, I think you actually brought up another topic which is interesting to the European VC scene, which is, are we using Twitter at all? Because for me, the European VC, and meaning David and I and everything we're building, we've kind of said, well, Twitter doesn't really work very well for Europe. It works very well for the European VCs that care a lot about the US scene, but it is very US-centric. But I'd love to hear, Kathy, because you're an avid follower there, and you love the European scene, so I'd love to hear your take on it, and also maybe Dan and Peter's.
Yeah, well, look, from a comms perspective, my advice to anyone who was thinking about this would be just share your thoughts on all platforms that are relevant, because there's always going to be a different follower engaging on a different platform, and it can be useful. So I know that there are a fair few VCs that are still very, very, very active on Twitter. Actually, some of them should shut up more, but they won't. What's interesting is seeing the amount of content that's being used very well on LinkedIn and how much that has changed. And the other thing I think with the whole Musk thing potentially is, while he said I want to add 750 million new users, there is going to be that shake-up of how many will just abandon the platform because of what's happening and because of change. For me, the feeling sort of a bit reminiscent of how I feel with Facebook right now. Facebook has become that thing that I check once a week on my laptop just to see the photos that my mum's put up. That's it. And then I've ticked the box of, oh, you look like you've had a lovely holiday. And that's it. I don't, for anything else, I'm not using it. I think from a sharing your thoughts point of view, do it across different platforms. Twitter, I don't know if you guys have been seeing this, the increasing number of people creating special threads with advice. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. The cynic in me is wondering why so many, excuse me guys, but too many white men are telling me what to do, which is kind of what it feels like with Twitter at the moment on the bro side. But yeah, simple, try both. I think LinkedIn right now is a much stronger platform to use. On the European side. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Kathy, thanks a million for some online tutoring there for the European VC scene as to how to think about your communications.
No worries.
I actually think it's incredibly valuable for many who are not necessarily born natives on social media and really bother thinking about this all the time. So I think that we do need more content for the European scene as to how to use Twitter and LinkedIn and so on, because there is a reason why the US guys are doing it all day long, and in Europe you have many investors who you very rarely hear from. But Dan, let's get to the next step in this and the final segment. You've kind of started building out a series of posts that you're putting, out to help founders build their pitch decks. I'd love to both hear your fresh new perspectives on how to build decks, but also take us through your thinking around this in relation to your own deck as a fund and your own narrative for the fund.
Yeah, I think so the backstory is that I pledged to a bunch of people that I would create the best pitch deck in the world, and I'm picking up my fingers here and using inverted commas. So the idea being that, or the theory being that there is a lot of content online around great pitch decks, and most of what I read, I think is really valuable. I think it's something that is evolving and iterating, and there are those that hate pitch decks and are trying to create other formats to replace the standard PDF pitch deck, which I think is fair. I don't think it's going to fly. I think it will find some feet, but I don't think it will be the mainstream. So my pledge to a bunch of people was, I see maybe personally about 20 decks a day that I get sent personally. As a firm, we probably get somewhere between 200 and 300 a month that are relevant to us. I'm declassifying all the stuff that is just either nuts or B2C and I can't touch it, so the relevant stuff. And because I've spent 20 years on the other side of the desk pitching and selling and raising, so I've got that perspective. I've got now the VC perspective for 4 years. And I see all these decks and I see all this material. And what I don't think startups and founders truly appreciate is that I'm pitching upstream. So I'm pitching to my investors to try and infuse and engage a whole new bunch of people to then invest in my funds. So there's this kind of 360 view. So I feel very privileged to be in the middle of that storm. So I've started writing a series of posts on LinkedIn with all of the things that I'm learning and all of the things that have been shared and all of the best practice that I can collate. And I'm codifying how to build the best pitch deck in the world. Now, that's my attempt. That's my promise. Will I get there? There's subjective and there's objective. I mean, some people will always think I'm a tool, and that's fine. And I guess what I'm really hoping for is that if the material that I produce can help a founder change at least 3 things in their pitch material, then I've won. Then to me that's a massive win. So the key. I could talk on this for hours and hours and hours, but let me just share my key thinking. There are some very stock standard things that you have to include, which I wrote about yesterday and I posted on LinkedIn. I'll share in the EUVC channel. And then there are a number of questions that you need to ask and answer around the narrative and the thread. So the way that I see it, there are the stock staples, and they are product, problem, solution, go to market team. There are things that you just have to cover. And then you've got this narrative thread that must run through. And so you've got the what, if you like, on the content side, and then you've got the narrative or the storyline or the theming, which is the why. Why will I read this pitch material to the end? And then how will all you really want as a pitcher is to get the next meeting or to get the next interaction. That's the only purpose of this pitch material, is to get the next thing, the next meeting, the call, the interaction. So I'm codifying the content, and I've pretty much done that, and I'm codifying the thematic questions to ask around narrative, storyline, and theme. And one thing as a side, which I want to just share, is how you tell that story. This is another thing that I'm exploring just as an aside. How you tell that story from the client's perspective. So don't tell it from your perspective as the founding team or the startup, but how do you tell that story as them? And is that something that will fly? I tried it yesterday with a founding team, and we're going to give it a go. They're going for their series, one of our startups, and they've graduated from us, and then they're now Series A, and they're doing fabulously well. So it's how we perhaps tell their client stories throughout their deck. So in a nutshell, codifying the best pitch deck in the world. What do you have to have? What is the story, the theme, that kind of thematic way of getting the reader to read to the end? And then where can you break the rules? That's my mission.
I'm just going to put something in here before Peter and Kathy comment. I saw, a month ago or two maybe, Matt, your partner, then give a speech basically on your thesis and where it comes from and why you think it should do around Industry 4.0 and the automation of work and so on. And I thought this is exactly the type of investment thesis story that I want to hear. It's perfectly fine if you don't have that as an investor, and don't think about, there being a long, series of inflection points in technology and society and so on that underpins your investment thesis. Perfectly fine if you're more opportunistic and say, well, I've got great deal flow from my region, so that's what I do, I invest in that. Perfectly fine. But I just thought that narrative must sell so fucking well with LPs, because it really it makes you think. It gives you a good structure and framework to think about the world and what's happening within the vertical that you focus on. So, I really think we should do a deep dive one day on that, or just share mass pitching it, because I think that it is such a great storyline. But Kathy and Peter, you guys are very, very well versed in helping build pitch decks, reevaluate pitch decks, and also help build fund narratives. So I'll call on you to comment on this. Kathy, would you start us?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, when Dan was chatting, I was just nodding away when you got onto narrative and storytelling and everything. I'm like, yes, please. So most of the pitch decks that I see, I either see, with angel investor hat on, and they're normally very young pre-seed. I'm a tiny angel. I'm a baby angel when it comes to investing. So it's all still very new to me. But having been at Seed Camp in the past and worked with lots of companies that have raised capital, we normally end up looking at the pitch deck once they've raised, at least with my PR lens, right? And one of the reasons that I'm looking at the pitch deck at the end when they've already closed around is usually because in the pitch deck there is an element of story that we can take that helps with creating material for whatever we're going to do with the press. My biggest frustration when I see a pitch deck that's being targeted to me as an angel investor is that a lot of them do have a lack of story. Lack of story, or the other thing is it's not just the lack of story, and the two are very much tied together, but for me, I'm also looking for there's got to be some form of emotion. Like for me, the standout ones are the ones, bad standout ones, side note, are the ones that don't even tell me what the vision is, the basics, right? Like what is the purpose of what you're doing? And as a storyteller, that's really, 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 really important. There's a couple of little exercises you can do to work on being a good storyteller. This isn't specifically to pitch decks, but just in being able to actually create a narrative and everything. And it's just writing exercises, but write down what your 10-minute version of your story is, your 5-minute version, your 2-minute version, your 1-minute version, your 1-line version, and self-edit as much as you can. Use programs like Grammarly even just to very quickly get rid of fluff that you don't need. If you can, I know it's difficult sometimes even in B2B, but there is emotion in making decisions, so find a way to bring that into what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter, tell me, you are now raising Fund 3, you've raised 2 already. How do you think about the narrative around your fund?
Well, for me, narrative is very easy. It's just I don't know how LPs will see it, because we've been doing something for the last 4 or 5 years, and we see huge opportunity here in the I would say the very early stage, angel stage, in whole region. There is still not much money, not much investors that can help really help, and especially there's not so much cooperation between these single countries. So quite often I find a very nice business, very nice project, but the guys are doing the same in Estonia, Romania, Czechia, and they don't know each other. So what we are building right now is a kind of network of angels or smallish LPs in all these different countries, where they invest together, and they can be joined by a little bit larger investors, but we still are going to be first investors, and which is still very much needed in these countries. So I see it as a huge opportunity. I hope some LPs will see it as well. It's not, I would say, not much, It's a huge story, huge narrative. It's just the market opportunity. And it's, if I well, I always say if you look on Silicon Valley 20 years ago, everything was there, so people knew each other. Now great ideas, great companies are growing in all different parts of Europe. And we try to pick the best ones, the best founders in these countries, and we still want to focus on large CEE region.
Yeah, and obviously there's a story around that, which I think that is the European narrative, that we are coming together as a European continent, that where the VC scene and the angel scene and the startups all over are just starting to do much more across borders, and I'm so happy to see that it's staying like that after COVID. And that actually brings me to the topic that I think we'll talk about next time, which is what the hell are we going to do with all the events, because many founders are starting to skip them, because why the hell should I go to an event when I can just call up Dan on Zoom? And that is a real problem that I've heard from people putting on events and also attending them. Well, there are much less founders than there used to be. But guys, this is it for today. So thanks a million for joining us, Kathy, Dan, and Peter, and everyone listening in. Make sure to tune in for our newsletter on EU.VC, as well as on LinkedIn, where we'll continue the conversation and also post the latest funds that have raised in Europe, as well as our Who's Hiring section, together with a whole lot of GIFs, memes, and emojis. We promise to do our best to entertain you. See you next week.